I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Village of Oxford Village Council, Tuesday, November 27th, 2018, to order. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Sure. Bailey?
Here.
Dolan?
Present.
Helmuth?
Yep.
Logan? Here. Frost?
Here. I'll entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda.
If there's no changes, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Support.
There's been a motion to approve the agenda as presented by Helmuth, support by Dolan. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries. Next, we'll move on to presentation. Our presentation is from Brian Kamler from Plant Moran. Mr. Kamler.
Would you like me to stand at the podium?
Yes, please.
Good evening. I'm here for three reasons tonight. Number one, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to serve the village thus far. It's been a very pleasant and rewarding project for us. It's what we do. And so actually, probably for the benefit of the audience, I should tell you a little bit about who I am and who we are. So my name is Brian Kamler. I'm a CPA with Plant Moran. I am a partner in the firm. My responsibility is to oversee the practice that we call PMGAP, Plant Moran Government Accounting Professionals. What we do is supplement internal accounting departments for municipalities of all shapes and sizes. So we have a team of about 18 people whose full-time job is to work with villages, cities, townships, counties, the state of Michigan, various libraries and authorities, and municipalities across the country, either on a permanent or on a temporary basis. And what we've been doing here for the past couple months is provided some internal accounting support. And included in your packet is a letter from us that explains what we have done to date. It's dated November 19th. So that is the second thing that I'm here to talk about. So to date, we have incurred 117 hours of work. That is all from a member of our team. Her name is Kelly Hanna. She is what we call a senior accounting consultant. She has 20 years of experience working for the city of Brighton before retiring there and coming to work for Plant Moran. So she is just an absolute marvel at coming into a finance department, understanding what the processes are, and then offering suggestions for improvement, and then helping the municipality implement those changes. And so of the 117 hours that we have incurred to date, 96 of those were spent doing basically catch-up accounting. So helping the clerk treasurer with reconciling bank statements going back to July of 2017, so for 17 separate bank accounts. And helping, during that process, what ends up happening is you find transactions that were not previously recorded, and you record those. Or you find things that were recorded in the general ledger that shouldn't have been, and then helping provide a correcting entry for those. And then, in addition, helping close the books for your audit for the year ended June 30, 2018. So that's the vast majority of the time that we've put in so far. The remaining 21 hours were to help improve processes. So it's one thing to fix the accounting after it happens, but it's another thing to unwind processes and then build them back up. And so what happened, we see this all the time. You're not unique in this way. But what we see is there are antiquated processes. So technology has improved. The number of people you have may have changed. The flow of information may be different than it used to be. but the internal processes weren't altered or updated to take these things into account. And what that leads to is various inefficiencies and errors, or manual work that doesn't need to be manual. You have a very strong accounting system called BS&A, which is, quite honestly, and I'm not on their payroll, it is my favorite system to work with. Approximately 90% of our communities that we work with use BS&A. And so you haven't been harvesting the full power of that software. And so the 21 hours that we have spent to date working with the processes, first and foremost is the implementation of a pooled cash system. What we mean by that is we let the computer do the work of figuring out where the cash goes. So the problem that you had was that you had too many bank accounts. There were 17, and now there are 6. Why were there 17? Very common problem. This goes back to, really, it goes back to like the farm days where the county treasurer would walk around with cigar boxes. And this cigar box was for property taxes, and this cigar box was for whatever else. And depending on what the farmer paid to the county treasurer, it went into one box or the other. And so primitive accounting systems were based on this cigar box mentality and eventually led to having a bank account for this activity and a bank account for that activity and a bank account for this and this and this and this. We just recently worked with a similar sized village that had 32 bank accounts, and we've got them down to, I think, 8. But the idea is that the computer can do that work. It knows, based on the type of transaction, whose money it is, what fund it goes to, is there a restriction on it? And so you let the computer do the work instead of having to reconcile 17 or more bank accounts every single month. So that's the sort of thing that we've been working on, in addition to some things related to payroll and interfund transactions. That's when one fund pays the bill of another fund, and it should immediately set up this receivable and payable situation where one fund owes another fund. And after the implementation of pooled cash, the necessity for that goes away. But when you have 17 bank accounts, you have to make sure that if this account owes that account, it's recorded in both places. So now there are some efficiencies that you now are going to be able to take advantage of. But that's as far as we were able to get in those 117 hours. The second page of my letter explains some of the things that still need to happen here. Your audit is out of the field. I'm not sure if the financial statements draft has been received yet. Should be very soon because it is due to the state by 12/31. And so that needs to be reviewed. So even though your auditors are a very good firm and they do a very good job, but at the same time, we have to make sure that your internal records match exactly what they put in your financial statements because they are your financials. They may prepare them for you, but it's still the village's responsibility. And so we want to make sure that the records all match up. And then there's some other year-end reporting that's also due by 12/31. And then there are opportunities for other improved efficiencies. Processes that can just be made better related to accounts payable, cash receipting, payroll can still have other improvements, utility billing. And then in addition to that, to make the accounting, the actual accounting that you have to do, because the computer can't do everything. There's still work that humans have to do. And so we would like to help with implementing a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual system, really a very comprehensive checklist. And from that checklist, then the clerk treasurer and other city employees can keep track of everything that has to be done and gives them a roadmap every month for what needs to be done for the accounting. So you have some very good people here, but they're new. And they walked into situations where not everything operated at optimal efficiency. Not everything was accounted for correctly. And so they've spent a great deal of time and utilized us to catch things up as best they can, or best as we were able to help with so far, but there's still work to go. And that's really the third thing that I'm here to talk about, is that we would like to stay on. We would like to help you on a going forward basis. For the things that are listed in my letter, we think that we could do that in about 11 days. And the cost for that would be $13,500. That's 11 days between now and June 30th. So it wouldn't all be done at once. It would be a couple days a month, because quite frankly, the folks that work here, they need time to do their own thing. We can't walk in and monopolize a week. It's not fair, and it really doesn't work well that way. But what Kelly would be able to do is to come in and fix some things one at a time, and then come back, and we'll check and see how it's working, make any modifications if we have to. And by June 30th, the things in the list should be implemented and should be working well. If there's additional things after that that we could help with, we'd certainly be happy to stay on. Many of our clients keep us on in a permanent but reduced capacity, where it might be 1 day a month, might be 3 days a month, whatever the need is, and to do double checks and spot checks and just help tweak things as you go along and make some modest improvements to the way systems work, and also provide a double check. Because you operate in a very lean environment, and government used to be that the accounting department had a finance director and an assistant finance director and a controller, and then there would be different accounting clerks to do different functions. And over time, partly due to technology, but also just partly due to tightening financial restraints, most of those positions have been eliminated. And you're left with one person, maybe 1.5 FTEs to do all this work. And while folks are very capable, it's still very difficult to get all that done. And our clients find it to be very helpful to have that resource to use just when they need it. So that's my third, it's an ask. I believe I have the support of the clerk treasurer. And if you so approve later on tonight, then we would get started immediately with that. And Kelly would come back out later this month or early into December.
Thank you, Mr. Camilleri. We will be discussing this at length later in the agenda, but at this time, do council members have any questions for Mr. Camilleri?
I'll wait till later. I think would be best.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
At this time, I'll entertain a motion to open a public hearing in regards to CDBG call for projects.
So moved.
Support at 6:43 PM.
There's been a motion to enter into public hearing for CBDG call for projects and supported by Helmuth, motioned by Dolan. I call this public hearing open at 6:42 PM.
Do we have to vote then?
Vote on the motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The meeting is now open at 6:42 PM.
Thank you.
If there's any residents or members of the public who would like to speak on this public hearing, please come to the podium, state your name, and if you wish, your address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Randy Gower. My address is actually in Lake Orion, 2667 Canoe Circle, but I'm here representing the Oxford Orion Fish Food Pantry. The Oxford Orion Fish Food Pantry is a nonprofit organization. We're servicing the townships of Oxford and Orion and the villages of Oxford and Orion, as well as Addison Township and Village of Leonard. We are a 45-year-old organization. We have at our volunteer staff levels about 50 individuals that come and work our pantries 4 days a week, and we distribute food to the people that are less fortunate in our area. And we are an organization that supports the village of Oxford. And in last year, we distributed approximately about 8,000 pounds of food to the village residents. And we also have Thanksgiving meals, Christmas presents for our clients' children's, and I believe we have a Easter meal also that's offered to our clients of Oxford Village. So basically, the individual who would qualify for our assistance would fall underneath a economic threshold, 200% of federal poverty level. They have to fall within the residency that we established for our boundaries, and which would include the entire village of Oxford. And then they're eligible to come in once a month, shop, It's a client choice pantry, so individuals go through and pick out food, just what they need. Everything is based on poundage for their family size, and everything is weighed and distributed to the individuals. No money is exchanged. There's not a cash register in the pantry. So I just ask the board to consider, community development block grant funding for our organization. We'd put it to good use and substance in keeping our operations ongoing. That's it.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, my name is Wendy Powers, and I'm here on behalf of Haven at 801 Vanguard in Pontiac, Michigan. And I do have some information I'd like to pass out to the council, if I may. As you may or may not know, Haven is Oakland County's only domestic violence and sexual assault crisis center. In 2007, we serviced all of Oakland County. We serviced 852 adults in our counseling program, over 12,000 calls on our crisis and support line. We trained nearly 11,000 individuals, and these are students, children and students, and even some professionals on things like sorry, I'm drawing a blank there. Healthy relationships, appropriate touching, consent, and we have age-appropriate classes everywhere from pre-K through college-age students. And we service more than 222 adults and 207 children in our residential program. It's important that I started with the other programs because people need to know that we are more than a shelter. While we do offer shelter on an emergency basis, again, we do offer more than that. We have counseling, we have prevention education, we have a crisis and support line, we have a resource room that helps our clients connect with jobs, food, housing, and we have a social action program that provides legal services or legal assistance and guidance through the court systems. And again, many of our clients are facing not only family and criminal law issues, but they also may be facing immigration issues. And then we also have a therapeutic exam for sexual assault victims. So instead of being in a cold, sterile hospital environment after such a traumatic event, they're able to come to our facilities in Haven and have be met by a first response advocate as well as a nurse who will perform the exam in a compassionate and comfortable as possible way. All of the services that we provide are provided at no charge to our clients, whether it's residential, counseling, the prevention education programs, all of that is provided free of charge, and we could not do that without support of very generous donors and community partners such as yourself. And we are asking that you consider funding us through your community development block program. The Housing and Urban Development does consider abused spouses and their children. They are presumed to be low income, so it is something you can fund through your social services apportionment. And I wanted to speak specifically to the Village of Oxford. This past year in the Village of Oxford, we provided counseling services to 6 of your residents. We helped file personal protection orders for 10 of your residents. We provided court advocacy for 5 of them, and we provided a sexual assault exam for 1 resident of the Village of Oxford. And these addresses are checked against the CDBG boundaries so that we are not looking at the Township of Oxford at large or other maybe crossover areas. These are specific to the Village of Oxford. And while 22 people, I'm sure, pales in comparison to what maybe the food bank does. Again, we provide these services free of charge, and those services alone incurred a cost of $6,814. So just to give you a little bit of perspective with that community development block money, how much of a difference you can make in the lives of survivors. And we know that 1 in 3 families are affected by domestic violence. So the 22 that we served last year, there are probably many, many more suffering in silence. And with your help, we can reach those people and we can help them heal and lead a safe and healthy life. So again, we just ask for your consideration and thank you in advance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When would it be appropriate for council
ma'am.
members to interact with the presenters here? Later on in the agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah, good.
please come to the podium.
Hello, my name is Dorota Kashkiewicz. I live in 52 North Gillespie Street. And I'm here, I don't know, maybe I'm in the wrong time.
Did you want to talk under public comment about the sidewalks?
No,
Okay, I'm
It's for
sorry.
a motorhome, I believe.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
code violation stuff. Or you're talking about ordinance, I assume then?
no, I'm actually wanna just make sure if I can talk about my parking of my motorhome.
Okay, let's save that for the next agenda item, the call to the public.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any others for the public hearing for the CDBG call for projects?
Rosa Bama, Pearl Street. I'd like to see the village get back into replacing and getting some sidewalks done in the village. There are several neighborhoods that could use some repairs.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you. Any others? I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Make a motion to close the public hearing at 6:52 PM.
Support.
There's a motion to close the public hearing at 6:52 PM by Helmuth, support by Bailey. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The public hearing is now closed at 6:52 PM. Our next agenda item is call to the public on non-agenda items, and at this time, we invite the public to come up and speak to issues of concern within the village. I will remind the audience that at this time, council will listen. We will take things under consideration, and follow-up will be made by our village manager. We will not respond, and we will not share in a dialogue on these topics. Thank you.
Are you going to limit the comment to 3 minutes? I think we got to state it in advance.
My name is Dorota Kashkiewicz. I live in 52 North Gillespie Street. We moved to village of Oxford in 1999, February. When we moved with boat. And nobody tell me I can park my boat anywhere because it's my property. And I specifically choose this home because it's not on any subdivision. Well, we sold the boat, we bought camper. I didn't have any problem to park the camper in my property. And if I park enough way from the street, so it's not on the sidewalk. Because for some reason, Gillespie have in wide, just on one side the sidewalk, we don't have in opposite street. Nobody asked me to put the sidewalk either. They just decide to put the sidewalk, so you guys still cut some of my property. Then we bought motorhome. Yeah, it's huge bus, and it's big, but nobody tell me I can park that in my property. And I park away. Right now it's on the side of my house. The gentleman was yesterday in my house, make the pictures how it's parked. My property is not even. My property have hill. So I can go with this huge bus on the back. I can go, but probably never go back. on the top. You know, the people gonna ask, many people ask me why we buy that. So I tell everybody, because I'm cancer patient, because I struggle with brain tumor, because that's my fun. And it's no way, because I'm not driving. I go anywhere, park this, like I try to park in storage, they don't have room for me. And this costs extra $100 a month. They offer me something on Dixie Highway. How I can go to Dixie Highway? I don't drive. My husband have to come back from work today early so I can make for this meeting. Not everybody has such an easy life. We don't. At least I am not. So I ask for some, we put as much we can in the back of the property. Secure the bus so it's not go down. We have to do some probably landscaping, put more dirt, put something over there, but not now. Nobody gonna do this now. They're gonna go do in spring. So I just ask the council to please let me keep, it's not really on the middle of my property. It's maybe 2 feet from the property, from the house, corner house. Thank you.
Thanks, Dorothy.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment on non-agenda items?
Excuse me.
Seeing none, we will move on to our consent agenda.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda, item 8A and 8B, including the bills totaling $42,235.
Is that No,
209.35.
that was the cents.
$42,209.35.
I'll support.
There's a motion to approve the consent agenda items A and items B, including the bills in the amount of $42,209.35 by Mr. Dolan, support by Bailey. Any discussion? Roll call. Seeing none, Madam Clerk, can you take a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Dolan?
Affirmative.
Frost?
Yes.
Helmuth?
Yes.
Logan? Yes. Bailey?
Yes.
Moving on to old business, the purchasing policy update. Mr. Davis?
We've continued to modify the purchasing policy, which is in your packet and has been available for your review. Working with the village manager and the village clerk, trying to strike a balance between a policy that is fair and equitable for all potential vendors, suppliers, and equipment providers to the village, and yet is reasonable in light of our village size, population, purchasing habits over the last decade or so, and what is good for the village administrative staff. We've tried to limit when we would have to have what we would have to purchase specifications. Sometimes you can get in a position where you're seeking a bid on something that is $8,000, but to get the specs done, an engineering firm might charge you $1,300. We will not be able to avoid that entirely. There will be situations where we will have to get qualified bid specs. We've tried to limit and make it reasonable as to when we would do a sealed bid process versus other methods. And I think the draft you have now is comfortable for the village manager and the village clerk. I would note, I do remember Councilperson Dolan was no longer in favor of any preferences with respect to, I think I recall you articulating that. That provision remains in here because we didn't have clear direction on that, but certainly it's in a spot that can be exited cleanly if that would be the desire of council. I'd like the village manager to echo his thoughts on this as well.
And again, working with Bob back and forth on this, sometimes we want to do this without being too cumbersome. When we do a road project, something like that, when you're getting large quantities, 50, 80, 100,000, 100 plus, obviously you have engineering firms involved and those with the sealed bids. Those persons are used to doing that. But one of the projects we had recently was about $15,000, $16,000, where we did the driveway approach on East Burdick there behind John Burt Realty. We didn't have it engineered and stuff, so we had some varying degrees of what the contractors thought should be done. Don showed them where he thought they should start and stop to have the replacement of the catch basin and the curb and gutter. And then we didn't go through a sealed bid process there. So we had people, those kind of guys, they'll email you from their truck out on a job site. So if we put in the extra level of sealed bids for theirs and that project, we may not get some bids because it's kind of cumbersome for them. They're only going to make so much money on a $15,000 project. So we didn't want to make it to where that type of a project or that low hanging project would require that. That was part of my thought process on that. Again, certain things will need to be spec'd out, and those will probably rise above the occasion of the dollar amount of $25,000, where they'll be spec'd out, they'll be bid out under sealed bids and all that stuff, with larger projects. And I think that's a good practice. Those folks bidding those are used to that.
We also made sure there was a list of items to consider that were beyond mere price. Council had expressed that, you know, it's not always just the lowest price that wins the day. We have built in now some safeguards to look at the quality of the service providers, the history, the reputations, and look at other factors beyond just the dollar amounts. So,
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Madore. Council, do you have any questions for staff and Mr. Davis? Questions or discussion? Mr. Dolan.
Comments in regards to that, just for clarification and further discussion, since it is a draft. My concerns were to ensure that the policy, that we did have a policy, that it was being followed, that it was legally sound. I was concerned about simplicity to staff and parity to all contractors, to include accessibility. My concern arose from at least the perception of nepotism, and nepotism including friends, not just family members by definition, that had been taking place. There were some complaints that I had received directly from contractors locally that they just couldn't get in because we had our select individuals that we used. That's why I brought this forth. I want to ensure that the village as an organization is representing the citizens and the contractors fairly. Once legally and managerially, we feel that that's been established. I'd like to see a final draft, and I'm in support.
great. Councilperson Dolan, what is your current issue with respect to Section 2-188, the local preference?
None.
You have no thought on that? You can go either way on that one?
I have my preference, however, I know that's going to ultimately lie. I'm not in favor of any local preference. I believe that our responsibility is to the community being the taxpayers. Ultimately, I am not in favor of benefiting an individual contractor whose proximity is within the village boundaries if it is to the detriment of the greater tax-paying residents. My philosophy is of the lowest cost, high-quality services to the greatest number of people prohibits any kind of favoritism or local benefit.
Got it. Okay.
Ms. Helmuth?
Just because we use these percentages and it makes them the lowest bidder, we obviously don't always go with the lowest bidder.
Correct.
It just gives them a little bit of backing behind them, so we're not going, oh, he's 10% higher. It puts them more in parity. And I think local, if they're considered in parity, it's also doing something for our community than if they live in Grand Rapids. So I do like to leave the numbers in there because we don't go with the lowest bidder every time.
Mr. Dolan?
Just briefly, if I may respond to that, when we start talking about percentages, there could be a difference of $20 or there could be a difference of $10,000. And I've said this before, but my opinion is every $2,000 is essentially the average village taxpayer. And giving preference to a contractor that could result in any monetary amount is essentially throwing that taxpayer's money away, which would make a taxpayer, if they were astute and paid attention to what transpires, question why we would be paying that amount of money in taxes if we have the ability to differentiate between contractors. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the tax-paying residents are the top priority for me.
Mr. Bailey?
Yeah, I can imagine situations where some kind of preferences would be justified, but whether that would justify these particular percent numbers or using any percent numbers at all, or whether it should be done through other means. And the example of the kind of thing I'm thinking about is, okay, we got a job that's halfway done. And now at 2 o'clock in the morning, we get a call saying there's a major disaster on X street. And then we have to call somebody out of state to come in and fix it, when there's another contractor within the village of Oxford whose phone will ring at 2 a.m. and he'll go out and fix it right now. That might be the kind of situation I have in mind, but that's not necessarily worth 10% or worth 2% or what. So the kind of thing that the council could deal with on an informal basis.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Davis, do we know where these particular percentages were derived from, and how did they arrive in our current policy?
Those were the percentages that at a prior village council meeting that they established, using comparative purchasing policy schemes from similar communities. These were percentages, I believe, that they came to agree upon.
Okay. Thank you.
Just one last comment. The topic's passionate to me.
Yeah.
When we're talking about excess money, we frequently at budget situation and discussions go through what we would like to have and what we would like to do, equipment we'd like to purchase for the DPW and for the police department. My opinion is that I would rather put any potential savings, and granted, keep in mind that these are limited circumstances, they don't seem to transpire that often, but I'd rather put additional funding that would go to a contractor directly into our services as a municipality. If we're talking about a difference which secures a bid for a local contractor, it might help them. However, that theoretically could be to the detriment of our own police department, who might need another vehicle, they might need firearms, they might need vests, et cetera, et cetera. I believe in the take care of your own first, and that it's passionate. We need to be tight with these dollars. It's extremely important.
I've been here for 30 years. I don't think we've ever had excess money. But
Well,
I know what you're saying.
Let's keep the comments direct. Any other discussion? What's the council's pleasure?
I would move to adopt the recommended purchasing proposal after striking the local preferential bid.
Is there support?
I'll support for purposes of discussion. I'm not committing how I'm going to vote.
It has been moved by Mr. Dolan and supported by Mr. Bailey to adopt the presented purchasing policy after striking the local incentive, local preference incentive. Any discussion?
I'm struggling with striking that. I think we should give a preference to local and businesses. I think we should invest in our own. I think it's really important that we incentivize businesses, contractors alike being here in the village of Oxford, and also giving them priority on these bids, so.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Logan. Mr. Bailey?
Do you have any ideas of specifics, like you looked at the little percent chart and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and so on?
So I'm looking at I'm a little still, I need some more clarification on these numbers.
Sure.
Because I would like to visit something where we're looking at a percentage, I would say that's higher than 10% here, as it reflects as the Village of Oxford on this chart, so. Is this just going, so what you're saying from your comment on how this was derived, this was from previous years?
These are the numbers that, yes, these are the numbers that were approved long ago and are currently in place. Bear in mind that you only get to be treated as the lowest bid if you're within that percent, if you are an otherwise responsible bid. So, for example, if you have a responsible bidder in the village, and they're 6% higher than the next candidate, they would get the nod under this preference.
But really, just the nod as being the lowest bidder. They wouldn't necessarily get the
They
bid.
wouldn't necessarily get the bid, but they would get the status of being considered the lowest bid when you apply the percentage.
That was my comment also, thank you. Well,
And we have that ranging from, 3% in the United States, 5% in the state, 7% if you're in the township of Oxford, and then 10% the highest if you're in the village.
Now, does that apply for residents, or it has the actual business, brick and mortar business, or business itself?
Well, it would depend what the services are. I mean, it could be an individual as well, if they were bidding on a service.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Bailey?
It's not clear to me what the big difference is between a business that's within the Charter Township of Oxford versus a business which is within the village.
3%.
Yeah, what's the justification? Is there anybody who feels that
Difference is-
that's worth 3%?
Well, the difference,
It's not clear to me.
A village resident pays an extra tax to be in the
in the
village.
village.
And so that's why I think probably why there's a differentiation.
And as I can recall, village businesses pay an additional tax above and beyond what our residents pay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? There is a motion on the floor with support to adopt the updated purchasing policy after striking the incentives. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Do a roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. Madam Clerk, could you call a roll call vote, please?
Frost?
No.
Helmut?
No.
Logan? No. Bailey?
No.
Dolan?
Yes.
Could I comment?
Mr. Bailey?
I don't think we're done with this issue. I think the council members need to think about it some more. At least I feel like I need to think about it some more. I might vote the other way at a subsequent meeting of council. I'm not advocating that we put it on the agenda for the next meeting. I'll be thinking about it.
Any other comments? Mr. Dolan?
In light of that comment, I move to set the matter aside.
Support?
There is a motion by Mr. Dolan and support by Mr. Bailey to set aside the purchasing policy update
To the next meeting.
to the next meeting.
I'll support that as
Mr.
well.
Dolan, is that all right?
Next
To the
meeting.
next meeting.
To the next meeting.
Okay, we both nodded.
Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
That sounded unanimous.
The
to
ayes
me.
have it. The motion carries.
President?
Yes.
Councilperson Logan brought up an interesting point. If a person lives in the village, but yet their business is
Oh, I see
8
what
miles
you're
away, is that still considered a local business? You guys need to, I think, determine that in this process. What
Yeah.
determines a local business if that in fact ends up taking place? I guess just, that's something to hammer out.
We could think about that over the next 2 weeks.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I want to put in your brain
We'll
now.
do our homework.
Thank you, Mr. Medor. Moving on to old business, we'll move on to the accounting services consideration. Terry, would you like to speak on this?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to thank Brian Kammeller for coming out and giving us the perspective from an auditor's perspective, somebody who specializes in government accounting and some of the issues they face in the field and some of the things that we're dealing with here. And also, I really appreciate the board's support and the wisdom in tackling this problem because it's been long overdue, to take care of the issues, clean up the problems. I think this is your deja vu moment. You've been here before, and it's not just because of where we're at in this process, but because the village has a track record of not going the distance. It seems like you get so far and you pull back and you want to stop because, you know, there is cost associated with this. But in the big picture, there has been a lot more resources and money wasted on not following through and completing this. And we're closer than we've ever been. We've started the process. I think my best recommendation to you right now is don't stop. We need to continue. We need to finish this. We need to attack some of these other areas where we will see efficiencies improve. We will see savings in time and a number of other things that are just going to improve our accuracy in reporting, your confidence, because ultimately you are responsible, you have the fiduciary duty for the oversight, financial oversight. And so you need to have confidence in the numbers and what's being presented to you, just as the auditors can't do anything we provide them with the information to give us our financial statements and perform the audit. In going through this process with Kelly, we corrected a number of things. We found things that were inaccurate and stated inaccurately in prior financial statements. That's not totally their fault. It's only as good as the information that we gave them. So there were a lot of things that were straightened out. The bonds, the interest and the payments, the amortization schedules, there were just a number of things. So maybe Joe can help me out here.
Well, a couple of things. I only came in last year right before the audit presentation, and I heard them state several items that needed to be addressed. There was way too many signers on the accounts. There was way too many accounts. When I delved into the budget, I figured there was too many funds. You had the police fund, the communications fund, you had other funds that were splintering the money. So progress has been made on the front end. We took care of some of those things in the spring with the budget, eliminating the police fund and the communications funds, rolling that all into general fund, which is really where the money comes from, where they belong. Now we've got the signers on the banks cleared up. We have to redo them now because we have some changes. But we're down to 2 staff and 2 council persons on the accounts, which is where it should be, based on what the auditors recommended. And then we went from, 17 accounts down to 6 now, is that correct? Mm-hmm. So again, a lot of these things in the past have caused a lot of work. Like I said, the benefits of the BSNA system haven't been quite utilized, so you're doing extra work. So by streamlining it, it will also help us in the office be more streamlined and perhaps, the cost savings will be there in the long run. Last year, when they came in and had to scramble and get that audit done at the end of the year, I think it was about $7,500 in extra fees that was spent to get the audit done last year. And if we continue down that road over and over again, that's going to continue to happen. Yes, money was spent now, but I think then that will eliminate that down the road. It'll make those audits smoother and better.
Mr. Davis?
Yeah, just listen carefully to what Brian said, that you're not the only municipal entity who has faced these issues. Sometimes you begin to think, oh my God, why is it happening to us, the village of Oxford? I think Brian could probably spend hours at the podium, if you wanted him to, talking about other municipalities who've struggled through worse or similar conditions. I know I brought your entity into the village of New Haven, maybe a familiar site for you because you were there 7 days a week for a long time, and other entities where Plant Moran has done the same thing. Brian works on a team that just does this. He has a staff of 18 that just does this. Comes into these communities that have had financial irregularities and difficulties and straightens them out. And everyone that I have been successful with required a tail end to the process. 2 days a month for 4 months, 1 day a month for the next 6 months, 1 day a quarter thereafter. Hopefully at some time you bake a cake and you say goodbye to Plant Moran, but it doesn't come fast. Things are really changing in your financial processes, and it's going very well.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Thank you, staff. I agree. Things are going well. We are certainly much better off than we were a year ago at this time. And unplanned transitions have a knack for racking up unplanned costs. And we have had an outdated accounting system for some time. We are nearly 20 years into the 21st century. It's time to update that accounting system. And I'm looking for discussion from the council members at this time.
Yeah.
Mr. Bailey.
First, a question for our attorney. I just heard him use two words in the same breath. He said irregularities and difficulties. Would you like to comment on the difference between those two concepts?
On the difference between what I meant by that?
Well,
difficulty.
I can understand difficulty. I'm not sure about irregularities. I haven't seen any evidence for it lately as far as irregularities are concerned.
Well, I think we have had some things that were not reconciled over the past, that wrong accounts, wrong balancings, wrong entries.
Any hint of wrongdoing?
No.
Okay.
No, not to suggest that at all.
I wanted to bring that out explicitly.
No evidence of wrongdoing. Irregularity is just something that's not regular.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Davis. Ms. Helmuth.
This is for Brian. Review the fiscal year 17-18 financial statements prepared by external auditors. What do you mean by that?
So, Brian, can you go to the podium? Sure.
Yes, thank you.
So that the tape can hear you. We can hear you just fine.
It's not okay just to have the auditors prepare the financial statements and then accept it as gospel. So there's at the end of the audit, village management has to sign a representation letter where the village is telling the auditor, we've given you everything that you could possibly need to complete your audit, and everything that we have given you is accurate. And the contents of our financial statements, the underlying records that you create on a daily basis that feed into those financials, you're saying these things are accurate. Not everyone has the capability of making that representation. Part of this review is to have someone who, not to toot my own horn, but Plant Moran is an expert in government financial statements. And so a combination of Kelly and myself, by reviewing that, then you can say with certainty, even though you may not be a group of CPAs, you can say our financial statements are complete and accurate. We gave you everything that you need in order to do your audit.
So do you recommend all your clients that they get an external auditor to come and check your work?
If the municipality doesn't have a person on staff that is a CPA or has 30 years of government financial experience, then I would say yes.
Okay.
In fact, the auditors shouldn't finish their audit if there isn't someone that can make those representations.
Okay, good answer. Because I don't like that at all. But that's a good answer.
Thank you, Ms. Helmuth. Mr. Kammerer. Mr. Dolan, I believe you had a comment?
I would just like to echo Terry's sentiments, and I concur with her assessment. I think this is a microcosm example of so many different things in this organization where a process has begun, but once it gets to the cost stage of concern, people back out and it's never quite completed. I think the village has done a great job in completing tasks and representing proper direction in the recent past. I think this is a situation in which the short-term sacrifice warrants the long-term gain, and I do think we have to take a little bit of professional advice and recommendations from the people that we've put in the positions to make those recommendations. I'm fully in support of the additional $13,500. However, I do believe there needs to be a finite endpoint and an objective that is clear for everyone to interpret. If at the future point we need additional services, then I would suggest that it would be a good idea to revisit, but I think we need to see this through.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Mr. Bailey?
Yeah, my question relating to Plant Moran. We have heard him just address us, and we've been listening carefully, and nobody else has addressed us. The question is, should the council draw any conclusions from the fact that he was the only one to speak from the podium? If there was another actor out there in the industry would that other actor have known about our situation and possibly considered coming to the podium here?
Well, there was two or three names provided to us from
Okay.
our auditors. Plant Moran was one of them. I can't recall the other ones off the top of my head, but with all three of them were given the opportunity to provide numbers, and Plant Moran, I think, was the lowest of the three.
I have to admit that I'm biased in favor of Plant Moran for a good reason, which is they know Oxford, the village of Oxford, and they're up to speed. And if we brought in another person, another organization, it would take them a while, and we would have to pay them during that time to get up to speed. But I just wanted to bring up the issue that there are other actors out there in the industry.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Thank you, Mr. Madore. Ms. Helmuth?
I'm of course going to say, we've now increased our budget by how much for this?
To date, it was 17.5.
And there's gonna be another 13, so we're gonna be over $30,000. I think we've hit the point where we just hemorrhage money in this, and it's gotta stop. I think we've been to this will be enough, we'll be able to do it with this. The next time it comes, this will be enough, we can do it with this. And I'm just really tired of paying for this. That's all.
Thank you.
That's all we gotta throw that out there.
Mr. Dolan?
No, I'm not going to touch that.
Any
With
other?
that said, I would make a motion to approve the additional $13,500 for the services as represented in the packet.
I'll support.
There's a motion by Mr. Dolan, supported by Mr. Bailey, to approve the additional $13,500 for the services of Plant Moran as represented in our packet.
And I have a question about that, or a comment, which is, I have not read carefully enough this document. And I would recommend to the other council members, think about that. Have you read carefully enough this document? I'm ready to vote.
Okay, that being said,
Ms.
if I
Logan.
can make a comment. Is there, I don't see one in here, but if I could get an actual invoice from Plant Moran based on what services have been provided up to date to tally that expense, and then also looking forward to these 11 days. Some of these services that are in the description that will be provided in that time frame, such as like on-call basis to provide accounting and finance support, things like that. I'm just looking to see if maybe we can negotiate that cost down a little ways. And look at some of those services being billed and maybe pick through what's really necessary at this point moving forward and what's not. So I would agree with Councilmember Davis that I need a little bit more time to review this.
Bailey?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
It's my first today.
There'll be a test later.
Does staff care to comment?
Yeah, we have some issues that really need to be cleaned up. I mean, bare minimum, we do have to file our F-65 and our Act 51 reports. Some of the things in working with Plant Moran, there are things that we can utilize the system for that will help us to be able to do this ourselves in the future. If we don't do that, if I don't have Kelly come back and sit with me and work on completing these reports, it's going to be another $1,300 from our auditors to file those reports, because they're technical. It's required by the state. It's not a choice, and we have a deadline that we have to meet. Our auditors that have been doing the audit for several years now have brought this to the board's attention on several occasions, saying that these things that we're doing now needed to be done, and they needed to be done going back a few years. And the reason why we're in the position with the cost right now is because we're circling back around and picking up, and now trying to complete what could have been settled at least a year or two ago, and then we wouldn't be facing these issues over and over again. The bills from, the invoices from Plant Moran have been paid. They've used the time, they've invoiced us, and I can make those available. And whatever I can do as I work with Kelly, this is over a 7-month period. We're talking about like 1.5% of our total budget in cost. And I don't want to keep throwing money at a problem, but this is a problem that's got to be fixed. And it's not ever going to be fixed if we don't address it and keep going forward. We can't stop midstream. So whatever the board's pleasure, the council's pleasure is tonight, you have to keep in mind there are a couple of things like that. We have 2 days in December, we have 2 days in February where we are going to be converting our payroll system to a flex system. It's not going to cost us anything, but there are a number of things we're going to be able to do with that in reporting for our MERS, the retirement, and other things, the W-2s, making things available to the employees online, so on and so forth. And it's a cloud-based system. So I need guidance through that. I need the expertise. I am telling you, I don't have it. I've been honest and upfront with you from the start. And I initiated the call to the auditors when I first came on board, knowing that audit was looming, and said, hey, what do you need from me? And he had a candid discussion with me. That's where it led me to Brian Camiller, Plant Moran, and these other firms. And contacted a number of other municipalities, like Brian pointed out, have the same issues, who have credentials such as CPA, they're certified public accountants. And it's still taken them a year to get their books cleaned up and assistance with their audit preparation as well, so.
And one of the things she just mentioned for the February, because we use paychecks for payroll here, I don't know how many years, but that's the case. Paychecks, because of the year end and all that they do, they can't meet our request until February to change that payroll system setup. That's their time frame, so in February. All of the bank accounts, when those bank statements show up next month, they're all going to look completely different than they have in a couple of weeks, actually.
Right.
So that's going to look completely different. Kelly's the one who structured it. She's the one who put it all together. So when those shows up, it'd be best if she was here to say, all right, here's why it looks like this, and here's how it fits to the new system. Because before we had those 17 accounts, and they were all trying to be mashed together.
Thank you. Mr. Dolan?
Just real briefly, I find it troubling to hear comments from council suggesting that they're not prepared. We're provided with these packets virtually a week in advance. Council has the opportunity to peruse through them, to highlight through them, obtain information that they want, pick the pieces out, and contact the administration for information they feel they do not have. Council should not come to this meeting unprepared, ever, on any topic. We empower these individuals to tell us, as the professionals, what they need. This is simply the cost of doing a professional business. And if we're not willing to do the cost of putting out the cost of a professional business, we should ask ourselves if we deserve to be here, or if we should, as individuals, be making decisions for the betterment of the entire community. If we can't take care of our own house, we shouldn't be taking care of the public's house.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. There is still a motion on the table that has been supported. Yes, Ms. Basardi, come to the podium.
Just come out of her chair.
Sue Basardi, Oxford. I have lived this situation twice in recent years. This problem needs to be fixed, and you need to take care of this now. You don't have the luxury of looking at past invoices. You don't have the luxury of trying to figure out where the money is coming from. There have been irregularities in the past. You need to fix this system. I've spent considerable time talking with Terry. I know what's going on. Brian, I think, was too kind to you guys. And I think you need to fix this problem. You need to fix it, and you need to fix it now.
Thank you, Ms. Basardi.
Okay, we have a motion.
We still have a motion on the table that has been supported, seconded to approve $13,500.
Rose, do we want?
Ms. Beaman?
Rose Bama, Pearl Street, Oxford. The BSNA program that you are turned over a couple of years back was never utilized to the extent that it should have been. I agree that the F-65 report has to be done by December, your audit has to be filed by December, and your Act 51 report has to be filed. if it can streamline by picking up the numbers from BS&A and putting it onto the forms, you're going to save the $1,300 that the auditors would have wanted and have in the past charged for doing those reports for us. And I would like to see this council go ahead and, as a taxpayer, bring our accounting up to where it needs to be and get the reports done so that next year when you're coming to do the audit, you can just hit a button and have it do what needs to be done.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you read back the motion for
Thank you,
council?
Well, I just have that Mr. Dolan motion to approve the accounting services as presented in the amount of $13,500.
Thank you. It's been moved by Mr. Dolan, supported by Mr. Bailey. I'd like to call the, do a roll call vote. Madam Clerk, roll call vote, please.
Bailey?
Yes.
Logan?
Yes.
Helmut?
Yes.
Frost?
Yes.
Dolan?
Yes.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
Council. Thank you, Mr. Camilleri, for coming here this evening and enlightening us onto the process and the services that Plant Moran can provide. We appreciate your expertise.
And don't overbill us.
Moving on to new business, Resolution 2018-21, CDBG projects for program year 2019, planning allocation $10,816, excuse me. Council, we've heard comments earlier this evening. There's also a memorandum here from Village Manager Joseph Madore. I'm interested in hearing the council's comments and discussion, and going from there. Mr. Bailey.
Yeah, I had a question for Haven. Perhaps you could go to the podium and respond. My question is perfectly straightforward. Is there a particular way that you deal with clients who, while they are of age, for whatever reason, are oriented towards a younger age? If you see the people I'm talking about.
No.
Specific to the topic.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
The kind of person who's...
Mr. Bailey, is this directly related to the CDBG funds?
Yes. Related to Haven's process.
Well, first of all, our clients are never the perpetrators. They're always the victims.
I understand that.
Okay.
I'm considering the person who's 28 years old going on 19, if you see what I mean.
Okay.
Or let's put 28 years old going on 16. So as far as the way they think, they are not of age, but their chronological age is adulthood. And those are a set of people who I'm sure are in need of Haven services from time to time, maybe even a lot. So I'm wondering if they're not children, and they're not thinking like adults either. They think like they were younger.
Right. We often deal with, many of our clients have some mental impairment. Some of that is directly caused by the violence that they've been victims of. There is absolute proof that trauma affects the way the brain forms. So children from an abusive situation will develop differently than children that are raised in a happy, loving home. Repeated beatings.
Let me stop you there, because I think we're getting onto a bit of a tangent that maybe has little to do with the CDBG funds directly. I appreciate the services that you have, and I appreciate your comments, Mr. Bailey, but I believe that we should keep our comments relative to the CDBG funds.
So let me just maybe give the simple answer is that we service all survivors, regardless of mental ability, religion, gender. We service everyone.
Thank you.
Mr. President, if I could just chime in.
Mr. Madore.
Yeah, 'cause all you need to do tonight is to make a determination of what you're going to do with the $10,816. Up to 30% can be set aside for the public services, and then the other can be used for specific projects. You don't need to choose those specific projects this evening. Just like
Understood.
between
Just the
these folks.
breakdown.
So just
I
the
see.
type of funding program.
Understood.
Mr. Dolan?
Mr. President, if we have no additional questions, I move to adopt the recommendation of Resolution 2018-21 allocating $7,836 to be used for sidewalk and sidewalk infrastructure to include curbs and tree grates replacement in the CDBG eligible areas, and the 30% or $3,000 designated for public services use.
Support.
It has been moved and supported by Mr. Dolan and Ms. Helmuth
Yeah.
to adopt Resolution 2018-21 allocating $7,836 to be used for sidewalk and sidewalk infrastructure curbs and grates replacement in the CDBG eligible areas, and 30%, $3,000 for public services use. Any discussion?
Yeah, a question. What
Mr.
does-
Bailey?
What does the last clause, the last phrase mean? What's public services use?
Look on your list there, provided in your packet.
That would be the packet you said you didn't go over very well.
I looked at these pages, all right.
Well, public services, battered and abused spouses might fall in this category. Sustenance payments might be with Oxbow and Fish. Health services would be another one that could be noted, and maybe mental health services. It's kind of good that we maybe mention all four of those in that motion.
Thank you.
Just to give you a broader range, but they want to kind of know public services of these categories would be a good idea.
Thank you.
Expound on.
Thank you, Mr. Berdor. There's a motion and support on the table.
Should we amend that motion to
I think so.
specifically state those four? Do you want to amend your motion, Derek, to include those words?
So that's category one.
If we're going to amend the motion, I would prefer to designate the recipient in the motion. And if that's the route we're going to go, instead of the generality, just a couple comments in regards to all of the potential recipients. FISH is an excellent organization. Traditionally, we have represented FISH in the past for, I believe, many different years. However, in this year, I wouldn't mind deviating a little bit in representing Haven. Haven is an organization that law enforcement literally relies on for individuals who have situations that law enforcement can't remedy, can't place, can't treat, etc. Haven is essential for individuals of many different situations, as previously mentioned. We rely on them. I would like to return some of that to that organization this year and maybe deviate from what we've done in the past.
Thank you, Mr.
So
Dolan.
I would amend the motion to include the specific designation of Haven.
If you need a second, I'll second that
Mr. Davis, do we need to vote on the amendment? Or can we just amend the motion before it goes to the vote?
We just have to wonder, I'm wondering if we should do it in two steps, though.
Let's do the segregation of the amounts first,
Yes.
which is the split.
I see.
So you have some going to sidewalks, right, in a
Correct.
designated amount, and some going to
Public services.
public services, which include those four categories.
Line 1, 4, 9, and 12 of the public service list.
And then,
Mr. Bailey.
The county's pretty particular on it. They just kind of want to know what category first, and then you have to do another process to maybe.
My original motion stands. I removed the secondary motion.
And I had already supported the 3,000 and the 10,000.
Therefore, there is a motion on the table that is supported. All in favor?
Aye.
Do we need a roll call
Roll
vote?
call.
Yeah, let's
Yes.
do it.
Madam Clerk, roll call vote, please.
Helmuth?
Yes.
Logan? Yes. Bailey?
Yes.
Dolan?
Yes.
Frost?
Yes.
if council wants to allocate the 3,000 plus to designated recipients this evening, you can do that.
Mr. Dolan.
Due to the benefits to the mentally challenged, women, children, victims, et cetera, I make a motion to award the $3,000 of public service money to Haven.
Support.
There's a motion by Mr. Dolan, supported by Mr. Bailey, to award the $3,000 for public services to Haven. Any discussion? All in favor?
No, do a roll call.
Oh, sorry. Roll call vote, Madam Clerk?
Okay, Frost?
Yes.
Dolan?
Yes.
Bailey?
Yes.
Logan? Yes. Helmuth?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Powell, for the services that you provide to our community. We appreciate those services. And I don't recall your name, sir. I apologize.
Randy Gower.
Gower?
Gower.
Gower. Mr. Gower, thank you for the opportunity to hear more about what Fish provides for our community, and thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Moving on to, continuing on with new business, consideration of ordinance for prohibition of marijuana establishments in the village.
Bringing prohibition back to Oxford.
Mr. Madore, if you would fill us in.
Well, again, like I said, this is still in the infant stages at the state level. It might be the middle of 2020 before some of the retail establishments are up and running based upon the new licenses that may be, put forth. Again, it's one of those things, if you do nothing, you live with the consequences. If you do something, you could at least, and maybe put a stop on it while you ponder it more and see what happens, what the state rolls out with. So that's kind of up to you guys. Like I said, under my recommendation, my first sentence was, I don't have any recommendations for this ordinance. It's kind of up to you guys to decide what you want to do. Now, Bob might be weighing on some legal things that maybe have been updated since.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Madore. Mr. Davis?
Council, the way this has to occur is directly opposite to the way it occurred last time. If you remember last time, if you did nothing, that meant you were going to prohibit such facilities. This time, if you want to prohibit facilities, you actually have to act. The MTA had, and other organizations had put out model ordinances only for the absolute prohibition of said types of businesses and communities. We only provided you with that version because that's the one that you would have to act on more quickly. The other thing that you can do is you can present this down to your planning commission to look at this issue and maybe in the interim issue a moratorium on granting any licenses, permits, or opportunities for these facilities until you have a chance to regulate through your ordinance scheme how you want to do that. The other thing that you can do is to take the action to move forward and complete an ordinance to go down the prohibition road with respect to these types of facilities. Many communities are considering these because it's now, it's a lawful business opportunity, and on top of the 6% sales tax that comes along with the sale of merchandise of any kind in Michigan, there's another 10%, I think, tax that comes back to the local jurisdiction on top of the sales of this particular. No one's real clear. I mean, this thing is brand new, and it's effective, though, December 6th, I believe. And shortly, you will, if you do not take action to prohibit it, you will have to potentially enact ordinances that regulate it.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. So what I'm hearing is that there's still many unknowns. Is that correct?
There are unknowns, except for the proposition that if you don't want these facilities in your communities, you should start down the road of enacting an ordinance for that purpose.
And Mr. Davis, is there any indication from the state level how long it will take for the licensing and regulatory affairs to put in place their licensing processes?
Nothing yet.
Ms. Helmuth?
I read way too much about this over the weekend.
There's a lot of stuff out there.
I'm a little confused on how the state's going to divvy up the tax money.
The last I heard, which was fresh today, was total of 16%, 10% to the local jurisdiction, 6%. You're talking about the mechanics of how they're going to do it.
Yeah, because I did a little research. I mean, Colorado had a booming year last year. And if they did by population, the village would have taken in like $25,000 in tax dollars. But I know it's not based on population, but I'm not ashamed to say I want that money. And I really would like to find out more information from the MML or the MTA. Joe, Terry, you both are township people.
I wouldn't got that MTA, off the MTA site, that ordinance.
I would really like more information before we make a decision on this.
First 20 million, the state is keeping,
Of course they are.
so they can get their apparatus and stuff in place and staffing and stuff like that.
Thank you, Mr. Madore. Ms. Helmuth, thank you. Mr. Dolan?
My opinion is regardless of what information we're provided with regarding tax dissemination, certain absolutes stand. Marijuana is a gateway drug, contrary to what proponents would like to believe. It is a risk to public safety. It increases the availability to children, risking and compromising their safety, based on the realistic propensity for adults to have it in close proximity to children. It is habit forming, and it perpetuates apathy. In my opinion, there's no amount of tax dollars that are worth selling out our community, our safety, our youth, and I think it's a slippery slope to go down. And if you take a look at Colorado, Colorado is an example of a community gone wrong or a state gone wrong in regards to promoting the legalization of marijuana. At some point, if possible, I'd like to hear, if we might have the ability to, the chief's perspective on this.
We can do that.
If Council President
We can do that
accepts.
after some more council comments. Ms. Helmuth?
I just also want to make sure we read the part about it did pass in the Village of Oxford, 904 to 686. So this sleepy little village wants this to be legal. People all over the state of Michigan wants this to be legal. I know you're speaking as a retired police officer, and I'm sure we have other police officers with the same opinion. I just think that has to be taken into account.
Thank you, Ms. Helmuth. Mr. Dolan?
Real briefly on that comment, I respect, we're put here to represent the population, but by the same token, individuals that sit back here are presented with additional information that the average population doesn't have, and we ultimately have a responsibility to the greater community, not just a responsibility that the individual has to their recreational pleasures. Despite the fact that the community passed it, my responsibility is to the safety of the community, and I don't think we have the ability to overlook that for tax dollars or the will of recreational use.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Any other comments before I invite?
Yes, my personal feelings on this issue, I think are irrelevant because we are to represent the Village of Oxford as a majority. A majority has shown us that, as discussed, they would like to see this move forward. I think this is something that merits a whole lot of public comment, and that's something that I'm willing to wait for. I think it's really early in the game to be jumping on this. We need to see how things set out with the state. We don't even know how Laura is going to go about this with the licensing and regulation. I think that it's as elected officials, it's our due diligence to be as inquisitive as possible. I don't think that's ill-prepared to request more time. I think that's actually doing our job, and I'm willing to wait as long as possible and get as much public comment and conversation from the residents here in Oxford about this as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Logan.
Mr. President.
Mr. Davis?
I agree with that. The reason that you have this before you is that there is some indication you won't have a lot of time. And if you are going to go down the ordinance road of prohibitive action, I believe that time is going to come upon you very quickly. So it's always good to have more information, I agree, but the way the statute is being interpreted, you may have to act well before you think, and that's why we wanted to get, and the first thing that would require action is the action to prohibit. That will come before you have to act on how to allow it. So I don't have that exact date yet, but I hear it's not going to be too long into the future.
Mr. Davis, do I understand correctly that if this council makes an action to prohibit it at this time, we can still look at our zoning, we can still look at what If we need to.
Yes, if you needed to, but I just wanted to make sure that you understood that this time to prohibit, you have to act, whereas last time to prohibit, you didn't have to act.
Right.
And I don't have the exact answer, and no one does tonight, with respect to when you would have to have an ordinance in place prohibiting these establishments in order to enforce that. If you miss that time period, then those seeking to have those businesses in your community would have rights. And now you would have to have some regulation as, okay, where, under what circumstances, how many feet from schools, how many feet from residential homes, what zoning districts do you want what operations in? Do you want retail? Do you want growing facilities? Do you want them in your industrial section? Do you want them in your downtown area? You would be in that ballgame of setting those ordinances and regulations in place.
Two more questions, Mr. Davis. So as I understand the state proposition, this will be legal whether or not we allow these facilities.
What the people voted on was what the voting percentage, what was it, 900 to 600? Yes. The people voted in favor of allowing recreational marijuana. The people didn't vote in favor of the village having a storefront to sell it. They just voted in favor of recreational use, which is what the vote proposition was. But once it's a legal use, then flows from it is the legal outlets to get it into the hands for the legal users. And those become storefronts, those become retail sales, those become growing and cultivating centers that have to go somewhere. And so even though the people may want to use it recreational, it doesn't mean they want a storefront. So you just don't know.
Right. One last question, Mr. Davis. Do I understand correctly that this is still illegal in the federal sense?
Yes.
And does allowing these facilities then aid and abet in committing a federal violation?
I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you.
I have a question. Bob, you're familiar with our zoning, oh, I'm sorry. You're familiar with our zoning ordinance?
Yes.
Which does not discuss marijuana usage, but would this be considered an adult use? So it would...
I think it's going to be considered a retail use. You have
like
five,
alcohol sales is...
well, you have 5 categories of potential businesses, right? People are thinking of allowing growing centers, cultivation centers in their light industrial sections of town. Some are considering dispensaries and retail storefronts in their downtown areas. Certain distances from schools, certain distances from residential homes. So you have your zoning categories: commercial, residential, industrial. You would have then, your planning commission would have to decide where, if anywhere, out of the 5, would we want all 5 or certain ones, and where would we want them to be, and what regulations would we impose on them?
But we have an adult use section of our zoning ordinance.
Correct.
Would this, do you feel like I'm not even sure alcohol falls.
It doesn't. It doesn't. Your alcohol, yeah. I think
it's strip clubs, adult bookstores.
I think we would have to, I think you would have to come up with ordinances for these.
Thank you, Mr. Davis, and thank you, Ms. Helmuth. Mr. Dolan?
Just in addition, and speaking as a retired police officer, it is a certainty that this will result in violent crime. If businesses of this nature are implemented in this community, it will, with 100% certainty, result in robberies, break-ins, and additional violent crimes. I say that speaking as an individual who has seen it firsthand from a community who wanted to sell itself out for tax money. It will happen, and you will have to answer to it.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Mr. Bailey?
Are we going to call on our chief?
Yes, I would like to, if council is finished with comments.
I'm finished myself.
Chief Sowell, do you have any comments in regards to this topic?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Welcome. I'm going to have to agree with what Mr. Dolan has said with his comments regarding it being a gateway drug and the issues that it will bring to the community. It is a certainty that it will. On top of that, we're going to have an enforcement issue. I mean, you still have an age, you have to be 21. I mean, there's still some things, and I agree, we need to sit down and talk about. The voters have spoken, but we do have the right to sit down and talk about whether we want to bring it into our community. That's going to bring in people into our community that are strangers that could potentially bring problems. But there's an age restriction, there's a quantity restriction. All these things have to be enforced. You can't drive still after you have marijuana. These tests are performed by blood tests that have to be sent to a lab, which is time consuming. Our drug enforcement officer, when he arrests a drugged driver, on average takes 4 or 5 hours of his time off the road. Now, that's one officer that we have working midnights. We are going to have to increase that if we are going to talk about bringing this type of issue into our community. It's definitely something we're going to have to increase our enforcement on.
Thank you, Chief Sewald.
Yeah.
Mr. Bailey?
I'd like to comment on some things that the chief just said. One is regarding to gateway drugs. I believe, other people may disagree, that because people think of marijuana as a gateway drug, then it is. I'm talking about the kid. The kid thinks, oh, well, yeah, marijuana is the lowest thing that's marginally legal. And, oh, yeah, I can play around with marijuana. The kid thinks that it's a gateway drug. That means it is de facto a gateway drug, in my opinion. Other people may disagree. My other comment is that even if we don't have any commercial activity within the village, we still got drive-through people who are intoxicated. Those are my 2 comments.
Right. Marijuana, like alcohol, it affects the way your mind and body works. It is going to make you do things you would not normally do. So marijuana, with that being said, with that drug, it is considered a gateway drug into other drugs. Certain drugs that you do, I mean, without getting too involved in the drug history on different types of drugs, when you take drugs, a certain amount of drugs, it's not enough. You have to keep taking more to continue to keep getting that high. So that is where marijuana takes you into that different realm, and that has been something that has been talked about in the past and in the present. That's just a fact.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. So, just 1 second. Mr. Davis, I understand correctly, though, that whether or not we prohibit a retail use, this will still be legal, this will still be in our community. Residents will still be able to grow a certain amount, residents will still be able to possess a certain amount. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Dolan?
Just for clarification on the gateway, you could bring up 5 scientific experts who are going to suggest marijuana is not addictive and is not a gateway. However, you could bring 2,500 police officers, and all 2,500 are going to say from extensive personal experience that while it might not be chemically addicting, it is habit forming, and it will lead to additional propensities to commit crime and use other drugs. I just want to make sure I'm clear on that. Mine is not a scientific comment. It is simply a comment of practicality.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan.
Council, let me just offer one more thing, and I'm very happy we're having this discussion. We don't have to act on this tonight.
Thank you.
I could see but I think it's important to get in front of you the type of ordinance that I think will come first in what you would have to act on if you so choose. How you end up regulating if you allow these types of facilities can be done through your planning commission process, most likely over time. But I do think, from what I'm hearing, that the prohibition-type ordinance is going to come faster than the other regulations. So the fact we're having this discussion and that you're considering it is exactly where we should be right now.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Medor?
Yeah, and I think Joe started down this path a few minutes ago. He said if you opted to put a prohibition, or prohibitive ordinance or a resolution in place, you could wait and see, and a year or two later, states work things out, you see what's going on out there, and you could always change your mind. The alternate can't really happen, because once you let them in, then now you can't get them out if you've realized it's a problem. So you could always have a wait-and-see approach, is my point.
Thank you. Mr. Bailey?
Yeah, with regard to moving forward, in my opinion, if we do nothing tonight, that does not mean that we're not moving forward. We've had a good discussion tonight. I think we are moving forward, regardless of what decision we make tonight about this particular meeting and this particular issue. We are moving forward, regardless.
And we'll have
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
more information for your first December meeting.
So Ms. Helmut's hand first.
Bob, I noticed when I was reading a bunch of different ordinances, we're able to actually put a number in and how many we're going to allow?
That has been considered to be acceptable so far.
Because that has not been acceptable for other uses.
No, you remember, the last time we visited this, it was about medical marijuana facilities, remember? And I think ultimately we opted to do nothing, and we don't have medical marijuana dispensaries or facilities in the village of Oxford, correct? Correct. We did nothing, and so therefore we prohibited them. And we had some of the same discussion at that time with respect to medical marijuana facilities. Yes, they are talking about allowing local zoning to have numbers, locations, and distances, and other regulations that I think wouldn't apply to other types of uses.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Dolan?
Yeah, just facts and circumstances of this matter are not going to change in its generalities. The grand concept is not going to change. We have a responsibility as the individuals who make these decisions to tackle the bull by the horns and actually make the decision. So with that said, I'm going to make a motion to prohibit all 5 categories of retail marijuana sales within the village confines of Oxford, with draft resolution to be completed by Attorney Bob Davis, with the input of the manager, to be reviewed by both.
I'll support.
There's a motion to prohibit. I'm not going to read the whole thing back because it was quite lengthy and to the point, and supported by Mr. Bailey. Any further discussion?
Yeah.
Mr. Bailey?
I wouldn't describe the motion with one word. I don't think it's a motion to prohibit. I'll go by what the tape says with regard to defining what the motion was.
Okay.
Just what is written.
I would like to say that, I mean, the memorandum that we have tells us that there are still many unknowns. And there are many opportunities to receive those knowns. The Michigan Municipal League is having workshops for municipal staff, and I would like to see our staff attend one of those workshops at the soonest available possibility. And I am hesitant to act on something that we don't know enough about. If we need to call a special meeting in a timely fashion in the future, we can do that. And I think there is a lot of things that are unknown and a lot of information that still needs to be gleaned by this council.
And if I can just
Ms.
echo
Logan?
that, I think this is going to be one of the biggest decisions that this council makes in the next year or two, along with what's going on with the downtown development and M24 project. I would caution going to a vote this evening on anything. I think that's going to set a tone. I think that we owe it to this community to hear all sides of the argument. I respect the views of Chief and of Council Member Dolan. However, I mean, there's arguments to be made on the other side. We're not talking about just a gateway drug, we're talking about a medicinal product. that has benefited many members of our community for cancer purposes, for, as a veteran, I can attest to what it's done for my friends with PTSD. We can't discredit those stories of what we're talking about. This is a very emotional, ethical situation, an issue that we're facing, and we need to, although it could be time sensitive, I'd rather than make a decision to call a special meeting and have public comment available in that time frame than make any kind of decision
Thank you,
tonight.
Ms. Logan. Mr. Dolan?
There's no discussion whatsoever about prohibiting marijuana from use. There's no discussion whatsoever about prohibiting marijuana from recreational use, medicinal use, PTSD treatment, or any of the other sort. This is to prohibit any commercialization of the product of marijuana. My motion stands. I'm demanding a vote because I want these council members on record for when a police officer responds to a dispensary break-in and is shot. I want someone to have accountability and to have someone to come directly back to, instead of an ambiguous, uncertain detail, which this council so often doesn't have the courage to make a decision on. My motion stands. I want to vote.
Mr. Davis, can I take Mr. Bailey's comment first?
Call the vote.
Well, let's assume Mr. Dolan did not call the question.
Okay.
Did he?
Or did he?
He did.
He called the question, then we moved
Well,
to...
we can vote on the issue of calling the question.
I was just going to go through the procedure.
Yeah, good.
So, to once somebody calls the question, then you vote whether or not you're going to call the question, and then there's no further discussion on anything. You call the roll on the question.
I see. And is that done with a roll call vote?
Yes.
If somebody asks for it, it'll be a roll call vote.
So, have you made a motion to call the question? Did somebody second that?
I'll second it.
All right, so we vote on that first.
There's been a motion to call the question by Mr. Dolan and seconded by Mr. Bailey.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Roll call, please.
Logan?
No.
Bailey?
Yes.
Dolan?
Yes.
Frost?
No.
Helmuth?
No.
Okay, so
The question is not
so
called.
the discussion is open again,
Yes.
but there's still a pending underlying motion.
Yes.
Sue and me, well, actually both.
Okay. We'll take Sue first. Ms. Bissardi?
I'm glad that Bob pointed out the fact that it doesn't matter how many votes were positive in the Village of Oxford and how many people were not. The question on the ballot was, should marijuana use be in the state of Michigan? I personally, and I'm going to personalize it, I don't want to see it in my 1 square mile village and in my historic downtown. I think that you have a lot to think about here. I agree with Kate. I'm all for it for medical uses. I know that it's helped people that I know that have had cancer and stuff, and I'm all for that. But recreational use in the Village of Oxford, I think they've got enough other places in the whole state of Michigan that people can go and buy their marijuana, and not in our downtown. We have to protect this downtown. If we don't protect it for the people that want to shop and work and live and eat here, then what are we doing?
Thank you, Ms. Bissardi. Mr. Bailey?
Yeah, my comment was essentially going to be identical to the comment that Mr. Dolan made. He made the comment more expansively, more detailed, and so on than I would have. So I'm merely saying ditto.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Any other comments?
I'll just comment that
Ms. Logan?
I think the concern here, obviously, and I hear Sue's comments, and I understand the concern with what we're talking about in comparison with just legalizing marijuana and then having it here in our downtown. The optics could be bad, sure. And I understand that there's studies that's been done, and we can talk about that. And I think that it needs to be further discussed on what that looks like as far as the actual increase of crime rate. But I mean, I can make the same argument about empty storefronts, and studies have been done on that and the increase in crime that causes. So I can't discredit, if our concern is truly the taxpayers and what's best for the interest in this community, I can't discredit a business opportunity, or I can't discredit what voters want without hearing what both sides of the story are and having that public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Logan. Mr. Dolan?
For anyone who's uncertain what that looks like, I would recommend that they sign a release waiver, ride along as a passenger in a police car somewhere on 8 Mile bordering Royal Oak Township, and respond to a couple B&E alarms at 4 o'clock in the morning, 2:30 in the morning to a dispensary. I would ask what your opinion is at that point, for anyone who is uncertain. You will be accountable for this decision. Something will happen. Expect to read about it.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Any other comments? There's still a motion on the floor that has been supported and seconded to prohibit marijuana establishments within the village boundaries.
Just let me,
Mr. Davis?
before you, just let me clarify. You already, this is not about medical marijuana facilities. Okay, so we're all clear. We're not voting on medical marijuana facilities. You already took action on medical marijuana facilities. These are different facilities now. Okay, this is for sales for recreational use, sales that would allow for recreational use.
Yeah, a question for
Mr. Bailey?
That word facilities, you use that word carefully. That really is in our present ordinance. True?
No, by not adopting ordinances, you prohibited medical marijuana dispensaries, grow facilities, transporters, and all of that. All of that was prohibited in the village.
I'm just trying to...
Facilities, I just don't want to keep repeating the 5 uses.
You said marijuana facilities.
Correct.
And that now we are on record as eliminating within the village of Oxford, or not? I'm trying to recall
what I was trying to make clear.
The exact words you used.
What I was trying to make clear is that by not acting maybe a year or two ago, remember we did a moratorium on medical, and we studied it, and ultimately we did not pass an ordinance with respect to medical marijuana facilities, all 5 categories.
Okay.
Therefore, this village right now does not allow medical marijuana facilities, all 5 categories, in the village of Oxford.
Okay, thank you.
This is the result of marijuana being passed for recreational purposes. Recreational users will now have to buy the marijuana someplace, which means it has to grow someplace. Communities are now forced to consider, allowed to consider with tax incentives, whether they want those facilities in their communities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
You've made that very clear. But the first time you went through it, it was not clear to me.
Okay,
That's why
I
I
got
asked
it.
for clarification.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. So remind the council, Mr. Davis, if you would, the procedure here. So we have a draft ordinance in front of us, or a sample ordinance, rather, that was presumably taken from, the MTA or Michigan Municipal League or similar.
The MTA and the I think even the MML and some other organizations are anticipating, as I'm anticipating, and I can't give you certainty on this, that action to prohibit will have to come be well in advance of your ability to pass ordinances to allow. So I think Joe can tell you that he got this from a version of this, which I changed, a version of this type of ordinance from the MTA, who's reaching out to its townships and saying, hey, we're hearing that if you want to prohibit these in your community, you're going to need an ordinance like this. So all we did was we prepared one that would be for this village,
Right.
for you to look at tonight.
And this is not passable tonight as it stands. We can look at it, but there still needs to be public hearings attached to this. Is that correct?
Correct. You would have to go through your normal ordinance adoption procedure.
Will your motion fly?
But what I think Eric the motion by Councilperson Dolan is to go down the road, start the road of prohibition.
Sound acceptable?
Right,
Take stance and provide a draft resolution.
get the ordinance in place, right.
I'm not sure that anybody else heard what he just said because
Could you
there
repeat
was
it?
noise.
Can you repeat it, Mr. Dolan? To get the process started. is
His
what we're
motion
saying.
is to, let's take a position.
Take action to prohibit
and-
the legalization of the 5 categories
And get a resolution and an ordinance in
commercial
place.
marijuana
Right.
businesses, and to enable the attorney, Bob Davis,
To get a resolution ready
complete a draft resolution and ordinance
for that.
with input from the village manager.
Right.
That sounds close enough to what I seconded, so I think my second stands. But you still got it.
There's been so much discussion, I don't even remember exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Ms. Pizardi?
Well, it's on the tape. Thank God for the tape.
Can I just ask Bob to clarify that if they vote to prohibit it tonight, it doesn't mean that a year from now, or 6 months from now, or 2 years from now, if they want to change their minds, they can go through the process of that public hearing, get all this input and study it to death and change their mind.
You could repeal it
Correct.
and go a
But
different
if
direction.
you do nothing, you have no chance.
If you miss the deadline that I don't know, to prohibit it, then you can't, there's no second chance on doing that.
Right.
That's what
So it seems to me that you would rather have the chance to repeal it than have no chance at all.
Now, just.
Thank you, Ms. Pizardi.
I have a question for
Mr. Bailey?
Attorney. Mr. Village Attorney, is there going to be any difficulties resulting from our passing this motion without a public hearing?
We are not passing an ordinance, and we are not passing a resolution. Mr. Dolan is looking for a vote to proceed in that direction.
Yes. Thank you.
Because I don't have a resolution, and we would have to follow our ordinance adoption process, which requires publication, hearings, chance for everyone to be heard. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. There is still a motion on the floor which support. What's the council's pleasure?
I'd like a roll call vote.
Roll call vote.
Roll call vote. Madam Clerk?
Helmut?
I'm trying to remember the motion. I'm going to go with no. I think that's the way I want it to go.
Frost?
No.
Dolan?
Yes.
Bailey?
Yes.
Logan? No.
The motion fails.
Fails.
Yes.
I would like to make a motion to set this aside pending further information and to instruct our staff to attend a Michigan Municipal League informational workshop regarding this topic.
Can you set it aside to a date certain, please?
Do we know when the MML?
Just set it aside to the next meeting, which is always.
Okay.
And then if we have to set it aside again, we'll do it again.
Yeah, I'll support it.
There's been a motion to set aside to the next meeting pending additional information and sending staff to informational workshop with MML.
That was staff, not council?
Staff.
Staff, yeah.
By President Frost and Councilmember Bailey. Any discussion? Do we need a roll call vote for this?
Be a good idea.
Yeah.
Madam Clerk, could you call a roll call vote?
Well, sure. Dolan?
No.
Bailey?
Yes.
Logan?
Yes.
Frost? Yes.
Helmut?
Yes.
All right.
The motion carries. Moving on to the, continuing with new business, the ZBA vacancy.
I think I have one typo in there. There was 2 persons, before you made the corrections to the ZBA bylaws, we had 6 members, and then you changed it down to 5, which is better. I think Mr. Dolan, which I referenced in the memo, his actual term was through 2019. It was the other gentleman who was on there, I can't remember his name, Gil? Yep. No, Jones is planning commission.
No, Gil was planning commission.
Gil, he kind of resigned, his term was going to be up at the end of the year, and I think I had his date on referencing Joe Bullen. So the term that is vacant is Joe Bullen's, and it should be my
2019?
2019 instead of 18.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Davis, I understand that as council president, it is the president can make these appointments, is that correct?
You make a nomination and consent of the village council.
Thank you.
What does consent mean?
Must be consent to accept, correct?
Yeah, we'll take a vote to agree with his nomination.
Oh, okay.
Ms. Hamel?
Do we have 5 members on the ZBA right now and 1 alternate?
4 with a vacancy. There's 4 in a vacancy currently, up to 5 member there. There are no alternates.
We don't have any alternates right now?
You have
Okay,
4
thank you.
and a vacancy.
Thank you. Mr. Dolan, did you have a comment?
No.
It looked like you may have.
No.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to appoint.
Well,
No public comments.
I move to nominate and appoint Ms. Supasardi to fill the remainder of the term expiring at the end of 2019.
Support.
It has been moved and supported by Ms. Helmuth. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Sue, for your continued service to this village. I know that you will.
We should have made her interview.
We should have made you.
Crazy question.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for your continued volunteerism to the community. Rose, did you have a comment?
Yes, I
Want to vouch for Sue, or?
She doesn't want her.
do. No, what I'd like to know is council appointments right now, Mr. Bailey holds. But when does his term expire as far
Term of
as the council appointment?
The term of office. Planning Commission, if you're an elected official on the Planning Commission or elected official on the ZBA, your term goes with the term of office, not with the other staggered terms.
So his term ends when his term ends here.
Which is 20.
2022 or 2020, yeah, 2020. Yes.
I don't think so.
I think historically, we've done them annually.
We have. But I'm
Okay.
just, her question was legally, it technically expires when his seat on the council expires, unless we act
What if the
otherwise.
charter says different?
But council can appoint a different member to the ZBA, can they not?
Anytime you want.
So council can appoint somebody else besides,
Council makes its decision normally to create its liaison member to the ZBA and to create a liaison member to the Planning Commission.
okay,
And we've historically done those, I think, yearly.
yearly.
Yeah.
Planning and able and
It
acting
does
zone.
not go with a term of office or anything.
But the law does.
Yearly.
The law says so.
The law says it goes with the term.
So are we going back to a term, or are we going to?
Do whatever they want.
To me,
Done yearly for years.
Right.
well, the Planning and Neighborhood
30
Act.
years that I've known.
Well, those statutes came out in the last, dozen years or more, so maybe they weren't used.
Okay, so my board members are going to be Susan added on,
Right.
Bailey as a council as a council person.
Right, he's your council
Council
rep,
representative, yeah.
Okay.
At least for this one.
at least for Monday.
Monday.
Well, because tonight they could actually appoint a different council member to the zoning board.
It's not on our agenda.
Yeah, it's not on the
Walk away.
agenda. And
Awful with me.
And usually, even the ones that end up at the end of the year, end up at the end of the year. I think you guys have done them at November in the past, but typically I've seen them
Normally,
through the end of the year.
you've kept them on. So, all right.
thank you. Moving on to continued new business, the manager annual evaluation.
Can we take a short recess?
Well, let me address this issue first.
Mr. Davis.
This is under new business open meetings. Under the Open Meetings Act 15.268A, both the manager and the clerk have the discretion as to whether or not their evaluations will be conducted in open or closed session. I have some indication that each wants to do it in closed session, so is that accurate?
I'd prefer so.
What's the site for that, Bob?
What's that?
What's the site?
15.268, parent little a, end parent. The discretion lies with the person being evaluated as to whether or not they're going to go into closed session. So we would need before we take that break, a motion to go into closed session?
After the break.
Or do you want to take a break first?
We should take the adjournment first.
Okay.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn for a 5-minute break.
Excuse me, a motion to recess.
Yeah,
don't adjourn.
Motion to recess.
Sir,
Not paying attention.
support?
I'll support.
For members of the audience, there's nothing left on the formal agenda after the closed session.
There is a motion to recess by Mr. Dolan and support by Mr. Bailey. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? This meeting is now in recess. We reconvene the meeting of the Oxford Village Council at 8:39 PM.
You're on item 11.
We are on item 11. Items removed from consent agenda. There are none. We will move on to public comment. Are there any public comments? Public comments going one more time. Seeing none, we will move on to item 13, manager, staff, and attorney's reports. Mr. Davis, we'll start with you.
Yeah, attorney reports. Glad to have a new counsel. I just wanted to remind two procedural issues. Number one, very well done tonight during public comment period. It's a one-way communication. I know it's difficult because you want to respond. All you do during public hearings and public comment is listen. The second issue I want to remind council of and new members of is that when it comes time for item 14, council comments, it is not a time period to raise new substantive issues for lengthy discussion and debate among council that would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. If there is such an issue, it should be on the agenda. So let's be careful not to use council comments as opportunities to raise items that should have been on the agenda and have substantive discussions. Those people who are the subject of those discussions should have a right to be here and a right to know that it's on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
All right?
Mr. Medor?
Only a few things. There is an MML training that Joe apprised me of a few weeks ago for new elected officials in Ann Arbor on January 24th. There is some money in the budget for that. Ms. Logan, I don't know if I sent that to you or not. If you're so interested, just let me know and I will. And I did send an email to you, I think, about your email, the new village email today. So if you haven't had a chance to see it, I will send that to your personal one of how you get to it and the temporary password to log in. Start viewing your email there.
Okay, great, thank you.
I would like to attend that newly elected as well.
Okay, it's very good. Snow ordinance issues are ongoing. This is the first brush with the snow we've had this week. A letter was set out for our code enforcement gentleman last week, about 145 letters sent to businesses up and down Washington, and even some on the east part of Burdick, informing them, heads up, there's a new ordinance in place, copy the ordinance, some things they need to be aware of. Of course, then today and yesterday with snow coming, he was out doing the enforcement of that. There was numerous, all over the village, numerous properties in violation, and numerous tickets were mailed today and probably more tomorrow if they are still remaining in violation. Online water payments, that's one of the things we talked about in the office here a few months. BSNA got me back some information today. We can do it with no cost to us all the way through the BSNA system. We would have to use and change our processor. We use that GovPay now. We would have to use one of the 2 or 3 providers that BSNA integrates with. One of them I am familiar with. It's called Point and Pay that Richfield has used for years, where people pay their taxes. You go right to BSNA online is where you end up, and it's processed through there. It would automatically flow right into our cash receiving system when they make the payments online. Really speed things up. We're even looking towards the email of the bills to the folks as well.
Is that a fee-based service?
It is. Up to 2%. I think if you do an e-check, it's $3. Even you pay your taxes, it could be 10 grand, it's still only $3. So that was more of a flat rate if you do an e-check, so like an ACH out of your account. I assume that's what they're going with that. I've never seen it described that way. But it's like a 2% fee.
Is there any benefit of that proposed over what we currently are utilizing?
Yeah.
Which is also fee-based?
Because it integrates right into the BSNA system. When you make your payment online, the day it's due at 11 o'clock at night, it will show up in our system as paid. Not 4 days later showing up and we've already sent your new bill out and now your call says, hey, I made my payment, and then we realize it, and then now we have to adjust the bill. So it'll be real-time type processing.
Gotcha.
And it'll show up in our account and right into our system. It'll automatically show into our cash receipting and be there just like you paid it at the counter.
Cool.
And this version won't have limitations on what financial institutions
Right.
you can go through, like in the past.
And we're still going to look towards maybe the ACH-ing, where people want to do the auto pay. That would be something that anywhere could do as well. But I reached out to BSNA because they already had that system in place for all those hundreds of communities that they deal with. And that was about it. We had a couple hiccups with the Weckel PUD situation a few weeks ago. Mr. Weckel got a hold of us. The bank had some issues with the surveys and the layouts of those properties and the legal descriptions. When the Mill Street project was done, that rearranged or realigned the street, surveys were done, and they were done, but they never were completely processed at the county. There was a hiccup on them. So they're still showing the old property lines layout where the road cuts one way, the property lines were overlapping it. So Row has worked, they have the old, Row did it back in 2009, I think it was, and then 2011, they sent them to the county. It was never finalized because there was a couple hiccups there. We're in the process, got a couple of those parcels already finalized. Row was just correcting a legal description, should have it done this week to try to get that out of our office and back to Mr. Weckel can continue on.
And one comment related to that, the DDA at the last meeting updated the PUD agreement deadlines to allow for these descriptions to be corrected.
This one came delayed about 3 weeks ago.
Right.
The bank picked it up on Mr. Weckel's end. They found it. They said, well, it looks like you own half the street. How can that be?
Right.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Just waiting on the financial statements. They should be, we should be getting a draft really soon, so.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to council comments. We'll start at the end with Ms. Logan.
Day one in the books. So, just, the only comment I have at this time is that it's a pleasure to be here with you all, and I'm looking forward to serving this term.
Thank you. Mo?
I'd like to have an item put on the next council agenda, the rat problem. I have a couple interesting ideas. I did way too much research on this, way too much. I knew way more about rats than I ever wanted to know. So if we could put that on the agenda, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Rat solution, perhaps?
Absolutely solutions.
Rodent solutions, perhaps?
There you go. Rodent solution.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
A comment? Has there been recent complaints about rats in the village?
I believe it's an ongoing issue.
Since long before you had an issue.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Mr. Dolan?
First measurable snow of the year, DPW did an awesome job. I emailed Joe, thank you very much. Please relay the sentiments to them. As always, they did a phenomenal job, but usually the first one is interesting as to whether they get out or not. I appreciate that very much. And the only other comment is just essentially to keep the police, our border enforcement officers, and our soldiers overseas in harm's way in your hearts and prayers. There's a lot going on. There's a literal invasion at the border, and the work they're doing right now is extremely dangerous. Our police officers face dangerous situations every day, and my heart goes out to them in their situations. I think they deserve the extra time.
Thank you. Mr. Bailey?
Well, ditto regarding the dangerous situations. And welcome, Ms. Logan.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you on board.
Thank you. I'd like to thank staff for all that you do. We are certainly progressing forward. Each meeting, each month is moving us closer to a professionalized village that has a professional accounting system and professional presence, et cetera. So thank you for all that you do, and to Don and his crew, who I know got in early and were able to clear snow off the streets. Had a couple hiccups in the downtown, but those have been corrected as well. And thank you to the efforts of the DDA. At the last meeting, it was kind of a quiet meeting with the Thanksgiving holiday. But since then, the village has been notified that we have been approved for the MDOT TAP grant for the streetscape improvements for the M24 rebuild in 2020. I'd also like to say welcome to Miss Kate Logan to the Village Council. Kate has a long-standing history with this community, having been raised here. She's an Iraq War combat veteran, a mother, and a friend to many in the community, and I am honored to serve with you. My hypothesis, and I'm not sure how to check this, but I believe you are the youngest woman who has ever been elected to this council. So thank you for your service. Mr. Bailey, thank you for serving in the role of President Pro Tem. I appreciate your willingness to serve in that role. And finally, I'd like to thank the members of the council for the opportunity to serve in the role of president. I'm looking forward to this, and I'm honored to serve in this capacity. With that, no further council comments.
I'd like to say Super Saturday Night might be younger than Katie, so I'm offended by that comment.
Well, 29 forever, 29 forever.
Yeah, Rose is older, but Sue and I might be younger.
So with that, we will move to closed session, where I will entertain a motion to enter into closed session to discuss the manager annual evaluation.
I move to enter into closed session under 15.268A at approximately
Looks like 8:49.
8:49 with the full council present, Attorney Bob Davis, the village manager, village clerk.
Who's are we doing first?
On the agenda, we're doing the manager.
The manger.
Joe, do you want Terry to stay, or would you like her to excuse herself for yours?
No, she's fine.
The manger first, as stated.
A motion that has been presented, still looking for
I will support it.
Tis the season.
Very festive.
Motion has been presented to enter into closed session for discussion of manager annual evaluation, supported by Ms. Helmuth. Do we need a roll call vote?
Roll call vote.
Madam Clerk, roll call vote, please.
Okay, Helmut,
Yes.
Logan.
Yes.
Bailey.
Yes.
Dolan.
Roger that.
Frost.
Yes.
Okay, we are now in closed session.
All right, we have returned to open session following the closed session of the manager and clerk annual evaluation. I understand that there is a motion. Mr. Dolan?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion based upon evidence which was discussed during closed session regarding the evaluation of Joe Madore in conjunction with the fact that he has been with the village either at or near 1 year's period of time. I would make a motion to increase his salary 5.8%, 2.8% of that for cost of living adjustment. The additional 3 is just designated as such.
Support. It's been moved by Dolan, supported by Frost, to make that salary increase.
Discussion?
Any discussion?
Not from me.
I have all kinds of discussion. I think this is coming out of the blue. I don't know that 2.8 is the cost of living. I don't know where he's coming up with this number. So as much as I like Joe, I would like more discussion on it than I'm prepared to have tonight.
Didn't have an effective date, so.
Effective immediately.
Are you seconding?
Is there still a second?
Yeah, I still support.
And just for clarification, the 2.8 is cost of living federal cost of living adjustment for 2018.
Federal, not necessarily Michigan.
It's the standard,
Yeah.
correct?
I just wanted to clarify that.
Any further discussion? There's a motion and support on the floor. Madam Clerk, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Sure can. Bailey.
Yes.
Dolan.
Yes.
Helmut.
No.
Logan. Yes. And Frost.
Yes. The ayes have it, the motion carries.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you for your continued service and professionalism, and Terry, thank you for yours as well, on keeping the clerk treasurer role on track.
It's time for my favorite motion.
At this
I'll make a
time,
motion
I
to
will
adjourn.
Motion to adjourn,
At 9:27.
I'll support that.
been moved and supported to adjourn at 9:27. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Motion to adjourn is rarely discussed.
That's true.